Welcome to part 6 of our live training session here with our Supercharged Honda S2000. In our last tutorial, we completed the full throttle calibration process, and at this point, we've dialed everything in so the engine can fire up and run, drive part throttle, and go into full throttle conditions, and have everything appropriate in terms of fuel and spark timing. We're going to find that at this point, we need to go and take a look at our cold start. So we've let the vehicle sit overnight. We're going to be taking a look at cold start, warm-up enrichment, making sure we have all of the fuel tables sorted out so the engine can crank, fire, and run properly. We're also going to be taking a look at things like acceleration enrichment, as well as setting up a basic launch control for our vehicle here. We're going to have a lot to cover. Let's jump into our live training session so we can get started. Welcome back to our live training session here with our Supercharged Honda S2000. Now, the last few videos we went over the calibration process from base map creation all the way to the last dyno pool and VTEC or high cam operation. Now we're ready to take a look at day 2 of the process to get the engine to fire up and run. What we're going to find is things change in terms of our fuel demands when the engine is cold compared to a warm engine. We're going to have what's known as a wall wetting effect, where the fuel isn't going to spray very efficiently out of the injector. It's actually going to be sticking to the intake track and to the intake valve. And we'll find as a result we need to deliver more fuel when the engine's cold compared to when the engine's warm. Now when we calibrate it and tune the main fuel table, that represents an engine in its warmed up state. So 160, 180 degrees and warmer. That table will characterize all of the fuel delivery that we need. But when the engine's cold, we have these sub-modifier tables that are going to go in and have a percentage of adder under cranking, under post-start, and as warm-up enrichment, as the engine's coming up to operating temperature. They're going to have a certain multiplier against the main fuel table that we've already figured out in the warm engine, and we need to go and get that sorted out so that when we crank, fire, and run the engine, it's going to have an appropriate air fuel, it's going to start up like stock, and we'll find that everything will fall in line in terms of how those tables fit together. They are going to essentially go in and work in unison together in order to achieve that result of crank, fire, run, and run it at appropriate air fuel. So we're going to go through that process here in this tutorial, taking a look at that. Now we still have additional things like our idle control that fit into the cold starting, into the warm up, making sure that we have additional airflow being delivered to overcome any kind of viscosity that we'll find with the oil. So the oil is going to have thicker viscosity when the engine's cold. We need to go and deliver a little bit more airflow. We know that in the idle control, more airflow means more torque. We need to deliver a little bit more torque to offset the lost torque from viscosity of the thicker oil that'll drag down the engine a little bit. Also, we lose some engine torque from the wall wetting effect. The engine doesn't produce as much torque. It's not as efficient as a warm engine because of that poor atomization. So we'll have these two factors that we need to overcome. We'll use the idle control, the solenoid, to deliver a little bit more airflow, to deliver a little bit more torque, to offset the lost torque that the engine has experienced from a cold running condition. Then we're also going to take a look at how the closed loop correction fits into all of this, because the closed loop is going to guide us in making our update changes into our post-start and our warm-up enrichment tables. Just as we found when we were calibrating and tuning our part throttle and wide open throttle, we can use it to do the same kind of thing here in terms of what percentage we need to go and update our tables by. It's a relatively simple process, but we need to pay attention to the details in order to successfully implement this and sort this out on your vehicle with the G4x. Now, a couple things I want to go and talk about real quick here. If we take a look in our basics, right here in our basics tab, we're going to find we have an ECT and IET. We can see what those are reading. I have the key on engine off right now. I've let the vehicle sit overnight. We've done all the tuning on the previous day. Now we're coming into it on a separate day. The engine's cooled down for a couple days right now. It's actually been probably about 3-4 days since I filmed the last time. So in this case, we're finding here that the engine's fully cooled. I just keyed on engine off, and we're finding right now that the ECT is reading about 79 and IET is reading about 82. Now on the dyno tower, the ambient temperature is showing about 80 degrees. So we're finding that these representation of the temperature right now are accurate. The calibration scales are accurate for the sensors. You always want to double check that to make sure that it doesn't seem like it's way off, meaning your IET isn't reading 100 while your ECT is reading ambient. They're reading pretty much on par to each other in terms of the values, the temperature registration, and they're reading right to ambient. Now, one thing I do want to point out is it's very common to see the ECT sensor being a couple degrees cooler than the IET sensor because it's submersed in fluid, and they seem to read a little bit cooler. So that's normal, what we're seeing here, this behavior, a couple degree difference. Fine with that, not worried about it. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. Now, let's jump from our basics page here. And let's jump in here to our fuel trim page. The fuel trim page is where we're going to access the pre-prime, the cranking enrichment, the post-start, and the warm-up enrichment. Let's talk about how these fit together. It's actually pretty simple. So what we're going to find here is we have our pre-crank prime on. We can disable this if we want to. I'd like to leave it on. What this is going to do is take a look at when the ignition key is first keyed on. It's going to inject this amount of fuel, and this is in milliseconds. Huge shot of fuel to get some fuel into the engine. We need to get some fuel into the combustion chamber just to get things started, because there's no airflow, or little to no airflow when we're starting to crank. So we need to have some fuel there, hopefully getting some into the combustion chamber. Even if the intake valve's closed, it'll still have some fuel behind the intake valve because it's spraying all the injectors at the same time with this big shot of fuel. It's just trying to get the combustion process started. This gets the fuel in there and it cuts down how many cranks to fire that we usually have. So the pre-crank is going to be for that first power on or key on type of situation. It gets the fuel in there. Then it moves into our cranking enrichment. The cranking enrichment is used a couple different ways. We have a first crank prime, and right now it's set to 50. This is going to be adding a huge shot of fuel for the first cranking revolution. As soon as it exceeds that first cranking revolution, it'll go back to the normal enrichment values coming from our cranking enrichment table. Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here. And you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.